fantastic. Well, what is everyone drinking right now?
Coffee.
Coffee? Well,
I grabbed the boom
good,
sauce.
especially for the morning.
Never had this before. Copper Ale, Ishmael Copper Ale by Rising Tide. Really good.
You got vodka in there, Chris? Straight vodka?
I do not have any vodka in there, Andy.
Okay.
It's right here, Andy.
Right there? That a boy, Hunter.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We have a very special episode of Mugs and Medals, the Miles Franklin Mugs and Medals. And this episode is pretty awesome because essentially we have the top interviewers and reporters in the medal space. And instead of being the interviewers and being the reporters, I'm interviewing them. So, and also with me today is my brother, Kaiser Johnson. And I'm just going to run through all the guests we have because we have, the top names here. Andy Schectman, Dunagun Kaiser, Patrick Vierra, David Morgan, Hunter Riley, Chris Marcus, Craig Hemke, Kerry Lutz, and of course, my brother, Kaiser Johnson. Now, what we're going to do on this episode of Mugs and Medals is kind of run through the election aftermath, how that's going to impact the economy, and most importantly, the precious metal markets for all of us reporting in the precious metal markets. So first off, thank you, brother. Thank you, Kaiser, for joining me.
My pleasure.
A little bit about you. You're Miles Franklin broker, but you also have a Hollywood career in acting, voice acting, and being a writer. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. I mean, that was a pretty good summation of what I do. I'm an actor, voiceover. Call of Duty just came out 2 days ago, and I'm in that. I do a lot of writing, some nonfiction, and then some fiction as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you guys for joining us. And we're going to actually start with Andy, the president of Miles Franklin. Kaiser, would you like to tell us a little bit about Andy?
Here's a little bit about Andy. He's the president and owner of Miles Franklin, a precious metals company that has eclipsed $5 billion in sales. Prior to starting Miles Franklin in 1989, Andy became a licensed financial planner, specializing in Swiss franc investments and alternative investments.
Awesome. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, and some of my favorite people in the world here also. All of you guys, thank you for making the time this evening. I really appreciate it very, very much.
Definitely. Awesome. Well, the first topic I'd like to discuss with you, Andy, is about obviously the election, how Biden is president-elect, at least according to a lot of mainstream sources. His COVID advisor is talking about a possible 4 to 6 week shutdown as COVID is getting worse across the United States. Already in New Mexico, we're seeing a 2-week shutdown starting Monday. And what do you think about these shutdowns across the country, either partial or kind of total of all non-essential businesses? How is that going to impact the economy?
I think it's not going to impact the economy very well. I mean, you're talking about, look at the backdrop. From the last shutdown, we have 100,000 small businesses that were at one point temporarily shut down that haven't come back. And the small businesses represent so much of the backbone of this economy, and they employ so many people that make this economy go round. So what do? Do you throw more stimulus at the problem? You have fewer people creating stuff, more stimulus being created out of nowhere. And what does that do for us? Does that mean we have more money chasing fewer things? Does that mean we have the seeds of stagflation? I think it's really scary, to be honest with you. I was driving through downtown Minneapolis this afternoon on my way to go get my concealed permit re-upped, and driving through downtown Minneapolis is as sobering and surreal of an experience as I could tell you. It was reminiscent of Escape from New York. Everything was boarded up. There was nobody around. It was disconcerting, to say the least. And if everyone gets locked back down, I think you have so many businesses that have been hanging on by a thread. It's one thing if you're where Kerry is, down south of the border in Florida, but where we are up here in the epicenter of craziness in Minneapolis, so many of the businesses that have been hanging on were hanging on because it was warm enough to be outside. You shut down this economy up here north of the border, up into Minneapolis, and I think the consequences are going to be irreversible. So many of these companies that are hanging on by a hope and a prayer are dead in the water, and I'm very concerned about it. The restaurants in my neighborhood that have been here since I was in high school for 30 years, they're gone, and shutting down one by one by one by one, and it's. I think that it's a real problem. I wish that there were ways to do this with a little bit more care without shutting everyone down. The masks are working, let's hope, at least in terms of being able to get out and go to the grocery store, go to your local small business. And look, otherwise, pretty soon, everything's going to come from Mother Amazon. And all you're going to see driving around the neighborhood are Amazon trucks. If that's what we want, that's where we're heading. I think that the small businesses, which are the engine of this economy, are in big trouble with another prolonged lockdown. Now, as it pertains to the precious metals industry, just as an adjunct, when we saw this happen in March, now I don't know if it goes this far, if they actually lock things down across the border, but I'll tell you one thing, if you see more disruption in the supply chain for precious metals, it will create exactly what we saw in March. Massive premiums, delivery delays, uncertainty. Look, I'm not a big fan of the lockdowns. I realize the legitimacy and the importance of protecting ourselves from this pandemic. But, as you've heard many times, and I question, is the cure worse than the problem? And it may be, at least in terms of this economy ever jump-starting again. And I'm beginning to wonder what it will take, if anything, to get Minneapolis back to what it once was. And I'm beginning to think that it may take a very, very, very long time before we see anything resembling what we used to remember just, 10 months, 11 months ago. So I don't know. Quite frankly, I'm very concerned about it. And then throw into the mix the social aspect, the anger that is permeating through this country, where there's so much divisiveness, and you can't even have a beer with two people who have different opinions nowadays, because it just becomes something that I've never seen before. You can't even have a rational discussion without it becoming anger and going down a path that nobody likes. I think all of this stuff together, and let alone the importance of social bonds, getting together for that poker game with your buddies, or watching a football game at a bar with your family or your friends, or whatever it may be, that the tearing of that fabric is also something that concerns me an awful lot. These are all things that I think have far-reaching implications, more so than just the economy. And I really, really, really hope that if we do move back into lockdown, that it's certainly not prolonged. And while I'm not a big fan of a vaccine, something that I probably wouldn't take myself, at this point, I'm beginning to wonder what it takes to get us back on our feet again. So, quite frankly, I think this is a deep question, one that's a lot deeper than just economics and our economy, a whole lot more, maybe as deep as the social aspects, and the fabric of what this country is based upon is being pulled apart at the seams. So I really do hope, I'm very hopeful for this country that we find a way out of this, because especially up north here, we're heading down a path that's going to lead to a very dark and depressing winter, at least up here in Minneapolis.
Our next one is, we got Craig Hemke here. He began his career in financial services in 1990, but retired in 2008 to focus on family and entrepreneurial opportunities. Since 2010, he's been the editor and publisher of the TF Metals Report, found at tfmetalsreport.com, an online community for precious metal investors.
Now, Craig, I wanted to ask you about, Andy was just talking about how are we going to get our economy back moving again? People have talked about stimulus. There was that kind of fight in Congress, and Republicans and Democrats not being able to get through a stimulus package. What is your perspective on that? In 2020, we've seen probably, the biggest stimulus package we've ever seen. Will there be more, and will that help the economy?
Well, first of all, guys, thanks for having me join you. This is great fun. Great idea and a great thing to be doing. Regarding stimulus, I don't know, I guess I've gotten more cynical in my old age. Again, it was probably true of all of us. But I thought for sure we'd get something in August or September, simply because it was an election year, right? And the politicians, that's what they do. They want to buy votes and put a chicken in every pot. The fact that they didn't, I thought, was really disheartening. And again, kind of picks at my cynical side because, gosh, here we can come up with billions in a nanosecond for the banks and for all sorts of special interests. But when you've got lines literally miles long of people just wanting food, for crying out loud. I don't know if some of you have seen some of the recent videos from cities around the U.S. I mean, I guess you could look at it and say, well, you know, there's people just showing up and wanting free stuff, but I don't think you wait in line in your car for 3 hours just because you might get a free bag of potatoes. And so I am, you know, 11 years ago, I was the first guy flying a Gadsden flag off the side of my house, and I was going to Tea Party rallies and all that stuff. And I just think we are way past that, man. And again, the winner of the election doesn't really matter. You know, who drives a train off the cliff is only a function of how fast they're going to drive it, I guess. And so, yeah, I not only do I hope that there is some kind of stimulus soon and some helicopter money, if you want to call it that. I pray that there is, because so many millions of people are hurting. Will it make any difference? Well, you know, buy you some time, but that's about all I think we can manage. And even this good news we've had recently that's been used to absolutely thrash the precious metals, this notion that there are these vaccines that are coming, even with, if they're proven effective and they decide they can mass produce them and then they distribute them, we're probably at least 12 months away from, you know, that kind of normal, you know, that we all want to go back to. And so, yeah, it's going to take stimulus. We did $3.2 trillion in deficit spending last year here in the U.S. It's going to be at least that in this current fiscal year that runs through September of next year. And I look, in terms of precious metals ownership, I mean, you can see where this is going. At some point, more and more people begin to catch on. More and more people understand that the dollar, the euro, the yen, and the like are all just being printed into infinity, really. And that sound money is your only protection against where this is going. You know, this was happening regardless, but COVID has sped it all up. So anyway, as much as I'd like to think I was a deficit hawk or, you know, all that kind of stuff back in the day, at this point, you know, until the system resets, you know, and all that stuff happens, well, we might as well just print as much as we can just to see if we can help as many people as we can.
Our next guest is David Morgan. David is a widely recognized analyst in the precious metals industry and consults for hedge funds, high net worth investors, mining companies, depositories, and bullion dealers. He's the publisher of the Morgan Report, a world-class publication designed to build and secure wealth.
Awesome. Well, David Morgan, thank you so much for joining us today. What I'd like to ask you about is the economy. And I know in a recent video you said that this whole thing, we were talking about stimulus, you know, and you said how when government subsidies stop, that's when the real crisis hits. I wanted you to kind of talk about that and kind of expand on that as well.
So to the best of my understanding, these forbearance and a lot of this stimulus stops January 1st, 2021. And if that's the case, and it doesn't have to be that date, it's my understanding that is the date, then a lot of these people are of the false belief that they don't have to make up those mortgage payments that they missed or some of these other loans that they've been given. So this is when, unfortunately, things are going to really start to get worse. So I'm just amplifying your prelude, Elijah, and this is something that concerns me greatly. Because there'll be people that'll literally go out on the streets. Now, I know different states have different mandates. In this state, for example, you cannot kick anyone out for not making a payment. But what happens to the landlords that are depending on those payments from the renters to pay their mortgage? So now that goes into the commercial real estate level. And so it's a mess, and it's going to get messier. And we just went, Washington State, in the full mandate lockdown again starting tomorrow. And I am not going to use any names, but this is the kind of thing that really irritates a gray haired old man that's been looking at this stuff his whole life. A good friend, younger than any of you, even younger than Craig, not as young as you, Elijah or Kaiser, wrote me an email or a message today, not an email, a text, and said, I think it's time for me to cash out some Bitcoin and get some supplies. I'd like to say where he is in the hierarchy, but this gentleman has known exactly what was happening for a very long time. And this shows me something that irritates me. And that is, this is a rant, so guys, put up with me, you all know me, and I think most of you at least like me, but honest to goodness, I couldn't believe I was getting an email. So I did a voicemail back to him. I said, well, type into Google or YouTube, essentials for grid down, essentials for purifying water. I mean, there's thousands of videos out there on how you should be prepared just for a weather emergency, let alone something that this Klaus Schwab said last night when I had my insomnia attack and listened to his latest update about what might happen. He's basically saying there's going to be a cyber attack and there's going to be grid down. Well, and I've said a long time in the Morgan Report, public and private, that the security thing in this internet space is not all as we're all told. In fact, and I'm certainly no computer guy. I mean, I had to take a couple classes for my engineering degree. But you ask any expert in the computer field, and they'll tell you that this D-Wave or quantum computing could break almost any code, and not in months. It's a matter of a few days or so. My point being that I am not deathly afraid. I've been prepping for a lot of years, but that you can only help so many people. I mean, the lone wolf with a bunch of food and a shotgun is not the way to go. You got to build community. You got to be relationships. You got to have skill sets. You got to intermingle and all the stuff that goes with it. And I mean, Elijah, you and Dunagun and Kaiser started reluctant preppers for a reason. People are reluctant to do this. And, I'm going to finish the rant with this. All of us that are here tonight have been trying to help as many people as we possibly can, given them the most precious commodity we have, our time. And it irritates me when people that we've worked with personally wake up at the last possible minute and say, hey, I better get going here. So I'm done. I am done. Honest to goodness, what does it take to wake these people up? Besides, I know there's some people who never wake up. And I know every one of you have got stories like mine. I know that. But I'm like, sometimes my darker moods is like, what could I have done better? And you know what? I can't do anything better. You could take the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Enough said. I'm done.
David, I've known you for a very long time, and there's not a whole lot you could have done better. You've been a voice out here for longer than any of us here. And you can only save the world one person at a time, starting with yourself. But you, of all of us, have nothing to be sorry for. You've been singing this for a very, very, very long time. So I appreciate you being here and your comments very much.
Yeah, I have to echo one thing you said, David, but I think as tired as you might feel of that phenomenon of people seeming to wake up at the last minute and say, now what can I do? I want to get started now when it's like the 11.59th hour is we ain't seen nothing yet, because even this guy that reached out to you or whatever is, the 1%er, because most people are just totally not at that place. I look at the demographics on our Reluctant Preppers channel that we started back in 2013, and the number of 20-somethings is almost none. 30-somethings is very low. 40-somethings is getting up there. There's a big jump up in the 50s and in the 60s. So it's like this retirement age generation has been concerned all along, but the next two generations behind just hasn't been on their radar. So I think that we've got, as wearying as it may be to hear that, because you feel like you've been dealing with it for a long time, and you have, the vast majority of people have not yet really put their serious attention to this thing about how drastically unprepared we are as individuals, as households, as neighborhoods, as extended families, as communities, as cities, as states, as nations. It's just it's going to get a lot. The sentiment you just talked about, like the first few waves here, but man, the tsunami hasn't come yet. It's going to. Andy always talks about that in terms of precious metals awareness and that sort of thing. But it's in everything. It's food, energy, protection, shelter, plan B, strengthening yourself physically, being ready for having communication with your extended family, that sort of thing. And I, as one who started Reluctant Preppers, feel woefully unprepared in terms of a lot of the categories of things I think of. It's like, well, I made this, and this preparedness, but far, far from what it's going to need to be in order to get through tough times to come. So
what does that say for the rest of us and everyone else who, isn't even aware of what's happening? You've been preparing and created a career around preparation. What does that say for the rest of this country? And when you think of it in that light, it gets very concerning, very frightening when you talk about social unrest.
Well, and speaking of the global concern, I think we want to turn to Patrick here. Patrick Vierra is a Singapore-based host of the popular YouTube show Silver Bullion TV. The YouTube show has more than 60,000 subscribers and nearly 6 million views. Silver Bullion TV is part of the Singapore-based precious metal storage company Silver Bullion.
And Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today. What I wanted to ask you
He's
about
joining us
was,
tomorrow. It's not today.
Well, exactly. In Singapore, it's the next day. It's the morning. And thank you so much. And the global situation, we've been talking a lot about the COVID situation in the US with possible shutdowns and all of that and the stimulus. But I wanted to ask you about the global COVID situation and how do you think it is impacting and will impact the metals markets in the future?
Thanks for having me on, and I'm really honored to be amongst you folks. And for David, find a little bit of peace. You were one of the guys that woke me up, so I thank you for that. With COVID, Singapore, I think first thing got to be said is Singapore is an authoritarian country. So as far as when you look at the U.S., the mask wearing or not mask wearing, people feel it's a choice of freedom. In Singapore, we did not have that choice. We were pretty much required to wear it. People were sent throughout neighborhoods, still going throughout neighborhoods called social ambassadors. They make sure we're wearing masks. They make sure we're keeping distant from each other. And so it's just a bit different. The freedom in the U.S. is not the same as in Singapore. I think freedom can be defined very differently wherever you are in the world. But nonetheless, having said that, we are opening up and we're about to start opening up a travel channel with Hong Kong. So we're coming out of it. With precious metals, I think because we are coming out of it, and as we're very dependent on other countries as well. So we need Turkey to come out of it. We need Switzerland to come out of it. All these other places that do the refining and do the shipping of the metals. What we saw in March, as many of you folks had seen as well, there was a bit of a shortage. And, even though the spot prices had gone down a bit, you couldn't get it nowhere close to that price with the premiums because you just couldn't get it. So I think globally, it shows that supply chains are very, very limited in some ways. We've gone to globalization, but within that globalization, we found just a few countries that'll do things in particular for the rest of the world. And this is something I personally think needs to change. I think more countries need to be able to produce rather than consume. And it's the production that does open up countries for their economies to start stepping up again. Countries need to produce. That'll help the economies.
Our next guest is Chris Marcus. Chris is a former equity options trader on the American and New York stock exchanges. He's a financial writer for Miles Franklin and founder of Arcadia Economics.
Awesome. Well, Chris Marcus, thank you so much for joining us today. What I wanted to ask you about is, how Patrick Vierra was talking about precious metals and how they've been impacted by the COVID situation. Now, your situation is pretty interesting, how you originally were, an equities trader and you worked on the New York Stock Exchange. How did you turn to silver? Just kind of on a personal note there.
Sure. Well, after I sat there through the whole subprime bubble meltdown and watched everybody be confused in my research, it struck me as odd. Every person who had written about the housing bubble in advance saw it clear as day. Was talking about gold and silver. So, and it's one of those things, once you have it explained like the Austrian school does so eloquently, and many of our guests here have studied, or you have guys like David Morgan kind enough. And David, I know what you're saying, the frustration, although I may just add one twist on that. I think part of what can help not just us or the gold and silver community. I mean, hey, if people get it the last hour, if someone called you a moron for the last 10 years, but they understand what's happening and they're ready, because I think there is an element of this which is more than just money, but there's like a freedom and true, honest way of living element to it, which I think is important too. And that's a big part of what got me into it. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'd love to move to Kerry now, because actually you were talking about Austrian economics, Chris, and Kerry is a student of Austrian economics, and that's part of his story as well. So,
Kerry Lutz is an entrepreneur and a student of Austrian economics. In 2010, he founded the Financial Survival Network with the mission of helping people to prosper and thrive in the new economy.
Definitely. So, Kerry, what do you make of this whole COVID situation, and does it kind of just strengthen your view that you got from Austrian economics to really move into precious metals?
So first, thanks for having me on, even though thanks probably aren't necessary. And I'm speaking from an undisclosed location, a hard site where Miles Franklin stores your metal before they ship it. If you look behind me there, you see the vault. Nobody's getting your metal but you. So just keep that in mind. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was just thinking the first time I ever talked to David Morgan, and I've talked to just about everybody on the channel here, I said, my life, you connect the dots going backwards, not forwards. And I remember being in the kitchen in 1965, I guess it was, and my brother came in and he said, look at these new quarters. It was 1965. And first he took the old silver, 90% silver quarters, and dropped them on the floor. And they sounded like they were something. And then he dropped the clad, the new copper clad quarters on the floor, and they sounded like garbage. Now, at the time, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm 6 years old. What do I know? Or 7. But little did I know that instant there was actually my fate. And then when I went to school, and I'm a recovering attorney, but before that, when I went to college, I'm at Pace University, and I see Milton Friedman's Free to Choose. And I said, yeah, there's something to these free markets here, that countries that have nothing other than labor, like Hong Kong, can become the wealthiest places on earth. Maybe there's something to it. And from there, led me to the library in Pace University, had a great business library, one of the best. And there was in a musky corner, all of the Austrian economist books, like Mises, like Percy Greaves, like Rothbard. And I started reading them, and I said, I know what's going to happen. And then, I graduated, started a family, went to law school, all that, was successful in business, and didn't think a lot about it. I thought, we're headed for a collapse at some point. And then when 08 and 09 hit, I knew this was it. I knew it. This was the beginning. And then, we had this semblance of normalcy that took place from 2010 to just, 6-8 months ago, where, the economy's getting better, everything's getting better. Yeah, it's getting better, but the debt just keeps piling up with nobody cares about the debt, I think, except me and maybe Andy and Craig. Nobody else is focusing on the debt. It doesn't matter. We just owe the money to ourselves after all, right? And then COVID came. So, I don't want to say a bunch of stuff here that's going to get this video treated specially by our technical oligarchic overlords.
Overlords, yeah.
Yeah, but let's just say that the instant I heard about this, maybe I was a little suspicious, because never in the history of humanity have we seen that healthy people get locked up, and that's somehow going to fix this. And hey, I mean, I sympathize with people among us here whose loved ones have got it, and really something needs to be done. But our overlords here have really missed the ball, deliberately or otherwise. And then on the other hand, I always think back to what my law partner used to say, and he was 20 years older than me, and he would say, you know, the situation is hopeless but never serious. You know, I try to say that now, but it's pretty darn serious. And but on the other hand, with age, hopefully comes wisdom, and knowing that your internal state of happiness, your internal state, is the most important thing. And you've got to find a way to be happy even when the world is collapsing around you. That is the most important thing. You prep, you do everything. Hey, in Florida, we have a prepping culture because we have hurricanes here. And the first time I had to leave my house, I didn't really want to, but my kids really annoyed the hell out of me. I left my house, you know, to go further north to be outside the path of the hurricane. And I said, gee, all this prepping and all this planning is kind of useless here, because I got to figure out, what am I taking with me? And, you know, basically a couple of suitcases. And so if it wasn't COVID, it was going to be something else. You can indulge in whatever theories that you want, but the fact is, and I've talked with Craig about this, is we're just competing. We have two people competing to be the new captain of the Titanic, and the Titanic's already hit the iceberg. It's sinking. All right. So you could pick one guy or the other, and you might like one guy or the other, think the other guy is really corrupt or whatever. It don't matter. So community, and really community, your family, your network, that's what's going to get you through this. And that's why you got to stay connected, and you got to make some sensible decisions now, even if you didn't make them in the past. You must make proper decisions now, because your survival and the survival of the country is going to depend upon it. That's like a little bit more than you asked me, but that's about all I got to say.
Amazing, Kerry. Well said, brother.
Our next guest is Hunter Riley. Hunter is a nationally recognized expert on storing, securing, and buying gold and silver. He worked on the rough and tumble trading floor in the future pits of one of the largest financial exchanges in the world, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Hunter Riley is the author of the Amazon bestseller classic, Stack Silver, Get Gold: How to Buy Gold and Silver Bullion Without Getting Ripped Off.
Hunter, thank you so much for joining us today. What I wanted to ask you about today was, how do we buy gold and silver without getting ripped off is the question. What are some of the, as we're talking about preparing and for what's to come and all of that, what are some of the top scams that you've seen, and how do people protect themselves against that?
That's the easiest question of the night so far. They just call this guy in the third row, or the second row right there, Andy Schectman, and get it done. There's really nothing else to say with that thing. I send everybody to him, and that's the answer to that. You got to get it from somebody you trust. And I have found nobody else in the entire world that I trust more than Miles Franklin and Andy Schectman there.
I appreciate that, brother.
So yeah, easy answer.
Definitely. And I was wanting to ask you also about, I guess, what is your perspective on the whole situation currently that we're discussing with the economy, and how do you think that will impact the metals markets?
It's a toss-up what COVID's going to do. I kind of think it's something more than the actual COVID going on. So you kind of, either way, I think it's good to kind of become your own central bank. We're going into, Fed's holding interest rates down for an extended period of time here, and it's just the debt's rising. So you've got to kind of play against that by buying gold, silver, some cryptocurrencies. I know some people are scared of the supercomputers and stuff like that, but I buy them anyway. And then like Duncan and Morgan down here in the corner say, you also have to become your own self-sustaining island almost with the prepping. So yeah, it's just, I think we've got time. I think people have time. I don't expect anything. The government seems to be able to postpone something longer than everybody thinks they can. So you've got time, but you just got to start doing it. Be your own central bank and be your own self-sustaining island.
Appreciate you, Hunter. Thanks for your kind words.
Hunter, what are you seeing in terms of scams? Kaiser and Elijah, you asked about scams. Hunter, one of the things that Andy and I have done a couple of interviews about is bringing up concerns that, because we have clients reaching out to us really concerned. People are, in contrast, I guess, what David Morgan, what you had said was that you were concerned that people were so waiting till the last hour to finally wake up. But when they do wake up, I'm at least glad that they are. And when they reach out to say, hey, what about this and what about this? They're starting to hear all kinds of input, and some of which is not balanced, or it's not actually the most important thing they need to be concerned about. Because some people who are delivering messages have a specific narrative, they got an axe to grind, they got something to sell, and they want to spin it in a certain way, and people get really worked up about that. So Andy and I have had to get on and kind of do damage control and just go, look, guys, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, it was, the U.S. Mint is coming out with $67 silver eagles. Quick, buy your better eagles now before they triple in price. And it's like, whoa, hold on, misunderstanding. Let's calm down about this. This was special box sets and that kind of thing. Misunderstanding. And then a few weeks before that, it was a different concern about people concerned that if they didn't have numismatics, they were going to get all confiscated by the government. This week, we've been hearing people expressing concern from a particular narrative that's being put out about CUSIP, CUSIP. If you look it up, it's a classification system around orderly classification of bullion. And some people are saying that's just proof that we're getting groomed and we're being put in line for confiscation. So I guess, Hunter, what are you seeing that you are most concerned that is affecting most real people who, in their good intentions, in their good integrity, are trying to take care of themselves and their families, but they're being potentially over concerned by narratives that maybe they don't need to be? I would call that a scam.
Over concern. I don't know. I'm not seeing a lot of people get ripped off or anything like that. People buying gold off of Craigslist or something like that, maybe they get screwed out. But other than that, with CUSIP and that stuff, I mean, if that's implemented, I'll just give I'm sure Andy would start maybe melting down some bars for me that they're tracking or something like that, and turn it into a come and take it round or something,
I'd like to answer that for a moment also. First of all, CUSIP, for those of you who don't know, just about every security on the exchanges, all the exchanges have a CUSIP number. So a stock has a CUSIP number, and it's a way for tracking or categorizing investments. And so, when this particular CUSIP regulation was sponsored by Delaware Depository, they're a very large depository that has the majority of all of the IRA precious metals in the country. They store the majority of them. There are others out there now subsequently, but many years ago, I was paid by one of the large IRA custodians to go around the country and promote their new precious metals division, and it was all stored at Delaware Depository. So at the beginning of the precious metals IRAs, all of the metal, just about all of it, was stored at Delaware Depository. This, in my opinion, from Delaware Depositories was very there was no big deal behind it. They were just trying to find a way to categorize and list for IRAs and pension funds and what have you, the metal that was being stored there. I'm not going to mention the company that has put out the majority of this narrative, but what is the one category of product that is not listed in the QSIP? Here again, numismatics. Now, I'm a big fan of numismatics if you can buy them at a good price, but the devil's advocate in me, or the side of me that is a little bit colored skeptical, would say that this is a drive or a narrative to push people into buying numismatics away from gold bullion and silver bullion. So I believe that when it was originally set up, it was done for it wasn't a conspiracy. It was done specifically to help categorize the myriad of different items that are listed on an IRA confirmation, or a spreadsheet of different items. So it's just a way to categorize what item these people would own. The one company that is spreading this narrative is a precious metals company that is promoting numismatics. So the skeptic in me would say that's what this is about. It's an interesting story, and you read it and you start to wonder, well, could this really be the case? But every single security out there has a QSIP registration, and so they did it for precious metals too, because precious metals are in IRAs, and pensions funds own IRAs, or pension funds have accounts with precious metals, and it needs to be categorized. So I don't think this is a big deal, Dunagun. I do think that it's an interesting story, but in doing a little digging on it, all I could ever find was information published by one particular company that specializes in numismatics. So I guess I would be colored a little bit skeptical on this. Like most of the things that we try to debunk, I think that in the end, it's about number of ounces that you own. And I think you have to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And I guess to me, that would be in getting as many ounces of gold and silver bullion as possible. Not buying high-priced numismatics in this environment, I don't think that's going to serve you well. So anyways, that's just my 2 cents.
On that, Dunagun, we've got a question for you, but let me introduce you first. Dunagun Kaiser has hosted the Liberty and Finance / Reluctant Preppers channel since 2013, where he brings together leading experts from the fields of precious metals, mining, finance, constitutional liberty, and preparedness, to benefit a growing audience of over 45,000 passionate subscribers who have amassed over 7 million views. And Dunagun, the question here for you is, owning precious metals as a way to protect your family's finances. So we've talked kind of about individual stuff and community and all that kind of thing, but if you could zero in for us on protecting your wealth and your family's finances through precious metals.
Okay. I guess one thing that occurs to me, and this is drawing back on my 35-year plus engineering background, is that before you do anything, you should first decide what your objectives are, and you should also think about what the constraints are that you're up against and what the risks are. Because one of the things that I thought I invented until it was informed to me that I didn't invent it was failure modes effect analysis. It's actually invented by NASA in the 70s. So I reinvented it in the late 80s, and has to do with figuring out what the risks are. So that's one of the things that occurs to me a lot of times when talking about preparedness is preparedness against what? What's the risk you're preparing for? So one of the things when you're talking about financial preparedness specifically is what are the financial risks your family needs to be prepared for? And that's what's the reality we're facing that we're not being told about. And that's one of the things when David mentioned that he has people waking up at the last minute and saying, hey, now I think I need to be prepared, is yeah, we're all sleepwalking. We've all been lulled to sleep. There's been this lullaby that's been sung to us about, everything's good. We're best economy ever. We're in growth. We're in this stable period. We're not at war, all this stuff. So people haven't been aware that there's just these ready to blow risks. And you can start all the way down the road. I won't go into depth on each of these, but there's risk associated with the stock market, risk associated with the bond market, risk associated with our currency, risks associated with sovereign debt, risks associated with investment banks and huge international investment banks with big derivative dependencies on each other, risks associated with consumer banks, the places that everybody thinks their money is safe is because it's in the bank. It's not in the bank. Your money's never been in the bank. first of all, it's not your money. First of all, it's not even money. But anyway, we go on. There's risks with the real estate market. And David Morgan mentioned, and others mentioned, the commercial versus residential. Once the forbearance periods are over and people start defaulting on their loans, in the economy itself, a lot of people have talked on this. Layoffs, record levels, velocity of money, record lows, GDP dropping like a rock. And oh, by the way, why is GDP so important? Back to the stock market. The first thing I mentioned way up at the top, the record price to earnings ratios and record stock valuation to GDP. So the stock market is being scored as we're hitting all-time highs today. Did you guys notice that? All-time highs again. All the markets hit all-time highs today in the U.S. on the stock market. So the scoreboard above the stadium is displaying best score ever, and down in the field, the players are laying just. Zombies are laying around. In fact, that's one of the things Michael Pinto mentioned to us, 50% zombie companies. So we're going to hear just horrific stories about what's happening when companies are having to borrow more money to sell bonds, which the Fed is buying up so that they can just pay off their old debt because they're not making any profits. And then it goes on there. You mentioned cyber attack potential for leading to grid down situation. What are we all going to do if the power goes out? That's one of the things I was mentioning we're underprepared for in this household. Food crisis. We've talked with Joel Salatin, the founder of Polyface Farms in Virginia, teaching advocate for food safety. And he's saying if our supply chain's getting disrupted, our food, if there's any more lockdowns, people think, oh, lockdown, it's a good idea, keep us safer. It affects meat packing. It affects all kinds of harvesting. It affects processing. It affects everything that gets our food to us. Civil unrest, Andy talked about that, what Minneapolis looks like. Minneapolis is not the only city that suffered in those ways. And that's happening. And I know, Kaiser, you just relocated out of LA to Arizona to get away from some of the scary stuff that was happening in the LA area. And supply chain disruptions. We've talked with an insider in the trucking industry talking about the potential for additional trucker strikes and that sort of things that are coming to truly impact our, the flow of essential things, foods, medicines, everything that people expect to normally be at ready supply. So all those things added up. We didn't talk about details on any of them. Every one of those, we're almost at record, unseen in the history before of our country, risk levels and all those. So those are the risks we're preparing for. So how do you do it? Well, to become less dependent on the fates of all of those things, the stock market, the bond market, the currency, the investment banks, et cetera, you go away from the system, away from derivative things, back to real things, away from things that only derive their value from the value of underlying things or activity, back to things that actually have intrinsic value that have proven, which is really interesting because it gets back to truth. Who was it? Maybe David? Yeah, talked about truth. Andy talked about truth. Is this whole thing of what's the worst thing that happens in a stock market is these bash and stash and pump and dump. So bash and stash is when people talk down something while they're buying it really low on the cheap. Chris Marcus talked about that a little bit. So that's what all the banks. So I wish Andy and Chris could talk a little bit about Basel III for a minute, why that's important. But basically, in a nutshell, from my standpoint, is to protect yourself from the risk of the collapse of the fiat currency, which really isn't worth anything. Look what the banks are doing. They've, for 18 months prior to declaring that gold was actually a tier one asset, meaning something of 100% real value that you should count on your books, they were buying it hand over fist, record levels of accumulation of precious metals by the world's central banks over the 18 months prior to declaring for the rest of us. Oh, by the way, precious gold is something of intrinsic value. But at the same time, Chris, you mentioned specifically Ben Bernanke and others in official positions down talking the importance of physical precious metals. So when the very most wealthy and influential people in the world are acquiring something hand over fist, while then later telling you it's really important, and then B, telling you, yeah, but you shouldn't be important. It's not important to you. You should just be focusing on the system we're going to create for you. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. A prudent person might do exactly the opposite from what they're being told. And I'd be happy for any discussion. In fact, Andy and Chris, if you could chime in on that, I'd really appreciate it.
It was amazing, Dunagun. I've been saying on all of your shows for the last 10 months that the biggest event of my career was the Basel III reclassification of gold as a tier 1 asset and the central banks massively accumulating it. Of course, the declaration by the IMF that they want a new Bretton Woods certainly adds fuel to the fire, as does since 2017 all of the central banks repatriating their gold from the Bank of England and the London and the New York Fed. And then, of course, what we've been seeing here this year, the others category on the COMEX pulling off all of the metal off of the exchange. It just seems that the people in the know have looked or are looking at gold as a wholly different vehicle than it used to be, and they are all doing something similar. They're taking possession. They're removing counterparty risk. They're taking it off the exchanges. They're front running these decisions. So as far as I'm concerned, in the 30 years that I've owned Miles Franklin, nothing even comes close than the reclassification of gold as a tier 1 asset. To me, when you see, as you mentioned, the most sophisticated, well-funded, and influential investors on the planet reclassifying gold as a riskless asset, to me, it is something that we should all take serious note of. And especially, as you said, the front running of that decision by 18 months, and then the progression of the people that make the rules asking for a new Bretton Woods, 190 countries from around the globe, and all of the things that have happened subsequently on the COMEX and the things that we're continuing to see every single day to reinforce this narrative. Chris, if you want to chime in, but as far as I'm concerned, it's the biggest event of my 30-year career.
I don't know that I have a particular comment on that reclassification. I don't know. Central banks are probably going to do what central banks have always done. Perhaps maybe a different twist is that the more I think about it, I don't know what the next couple of years are going to look like, but I would dispute this narrative that we're just all screwed, we're helpless, we're just at the behest of these guys. Certainly if you grew up in the US and had the idea of like being a corporate puppet and get your white picket fence until one day you croak from a heart attack from living in that unimaginable fashion that has become normal to so many of us. I think for anyone who has the entrepreneurial will to say like, hey, I see a lot of problems out there that need to be solved, I think it's an incredible time. And that's why I encourage anyone, whatever that method is, I don't think this has to be the Armageddon that we've been presented with. And I think the more people who take their own sovereign power back, that's why, to me, my issue with the election, just this subconscious conditioning that we're turning our whole fate over to one of these two guys who's going to decide everything. And so maybe the world is going to do what it's always done. Maybe this is awfully similar to what we've read about the Roman Empire, or what's happened time and time throughout history. And maybe what we control is, hey, world's going to do what it's going to do, but I can control me. I think for people who are looking to take the power back and just be a good person, solve problems in the world, I think there's incredible opportunity there. And the more we adjust to that, I think there's great things that can come out of this.
I wanted to touch on one of the things that Andy was pointing out, and Chris and Dunagun, about how there's this move in almost to the mainstream and, you know, the very wealthy moving into gold. And I wanted to get David's perspective on this, because we're seeing a similar thing in silver. Different banks have, publicly said they're bullish on silver. For example, Goldman Sachs saying they're bullish on silver. Bank of America saying that silver, they're bullish on silver, thinking it's going to rise. What is your perspective on this? Essentially, what is your perspective on silver becoming more mainstream as well?
Well, I think the most important thing that happened this year, and probably over the last 5, perhaps 10 years, is that Scott Meaner was interviewed by Bloomberg at Davos. The Bloomberg financial pundit asked him what was his best or go-to investment for 2020. And Scott Meaner didn't hesitate and said, silver. And the financial analysts or pundits kind of rocked back in their chair. You literally see them kind of knocked back. He came back right away and said, silver? Why not gold? He's stunned. He's almost in shock. This is my take on it. But you look at it, you make up your own mind. And Scott says, well, gold's pretty near its all-time high right now, but silver's off 60%. Now, if you go from that point till now, you'll discover something very unusual about the silver market this year. Craig's aware of it, and probably all of you. But I think Craig's made the most noise, and good for you, Craig. There has been more physical silver investment this year than any year that I've known of, except when it was actually money, which means that normally, even during the deficit years from 1990 to 2006, where the offtake was 100 million ounces a year taken out of the above ground stockpile, the normal amount of silver used for investment only is around 10% of the market, which is in round numbers, we'll call it 100 million ounces. This year, and the industrial demand's around 50%, depends if you look at CPM's numbers or the World Silver Survey that says it's 60%. We have had investment demand equal to industrial demand this time. We haven't seen that in 2 decades, 3 decades. Probably I've never seen it since, as I repeat, since silver was actually a monetary metal. So we're set up right now. And you all know I made silver pretty much my life. In, I'll use the word precarious situation, that unless you're really paying attention to the silver market, you have no idea of the dynamics that could, I'm not saying would, take place in 2021. If silver continues on this, in theory, you're going to be very tight in supply next year. And they might interview Scott Maynard again and tell us, I'm making a joke here, but maybe not, that he's just getting started, you know? But once it flips over to where the just-in-time inventory doesn't come in for Apple computers, Samsung, Ford Motor, doesn't matter, all these silver users, they're going to panic. And they'll have to inventory or warehouse silver for the first time ever. So the palladium market is a pretty good indicator of a physical short supply. And Craig's been talking about that for years, and maybe learned it from me, maybe he didn't, doesn't matter, fact is a fact. The point is that we're going to get a double impact. We're going to get that double parabolic, I call it, where you get the moving investors taking it into a tight supply situation where the sleepy industrial users wake up too late and they have to stockpile. Now they're competing against each other. Well, at the same time that's taking place, the Johnny-come-latelys are going to find out that silver's blasted through $65 an ounce, and it's really a good buy now because they could care less about buying it under 20 with Craig and Chris and Patrick and Kerry and Hunter and Dunagun and Elijah and Kaiser are all telling them, you know, buy all you can get under 20. But that's how the silver market works. So if I sound bullish, I am. I'm also in line with some others outside of our main domain here that said you may not like it when silver's 100 or 200 or 600, wherever it achieves. And I honestly agree with them from the aspect that there's going to be a lot of hardship for other reasons. But I'd rather have silver than not because I'm like the silver guru or I'm such an aficionado of silver. I just go to something hardcore fact that's very upsetting to me, and that's Venezuela as an example. And people that have silver can eat, and people that don't for in a lot of areas. And that maybe sounds harsh, and it maybe sounds hard, but it's also reality. And so people that say you can't eat silver, I say you absolutely can't, and dollar bills don't taste that good either. If you've got silver, the chances of you securing what you need is far greater than if you don't.
And on that, David, you brought up the question of industrial application, and Craig, I guess I'd like to flip it over to you. If we see presumably a Biden presidency here, and there's a big push into green energy and things bordering on the Green New Deal, if they're not the Green New Deal, and all the industrial application of silver there, what do you see as green energy and the Biden presidency's impact on silver?
Yeah, that's been getting a lot of interest in this story as well. I saw some stuff, I don't know, first, I think a couple of months ago about silver tracking that ETF with the symbol TAN, which is kind of like a Green New Deal type portfolio, if I understand it right. And they've been moving kind of hand in hand for quite some time. And then the idea behind that is, there's so many industrial applications for silver that maybe all this extra demand is going to be coming forward. But like David was just saying, I mean, I don't even know if we'll make 800 million ounces this year out of the ground because, Mexico was shut down for a while and Peru was shut down for a while. And when you've got, I mean, what are the numbers into these ETFs year to date? Like 400 million ounces or something like that? Yeah. At least that's what they allege. At some point, where's it all coming from? And so there are a lot of other, I guess, tailwinds for silver as we head into 2021. Probably too many to list because there are so many out there. I just look at it and I think $24 an ounce is going to be considered a bargain as we go forward for all those different reasons. And then when you factor in the last couple of pieces of the puzzle, these research banks, these investment banks that are talking about industrial demand for silver, or they're talking about the dollar going down by 20%. I saw Citi forecast that earlier this week. Boy, you put all those things together, you get the Robin Hood traders suddenly getting excited about silver and catching the momentum. Things should start to move kind of reminiscent of 2011 as well. So, that the Biden administration and all that Green New Deal stuff and solar panels and the mandate of electric cars and a solar panel on every roof. Yeah, that's all solid fundamental stuff. But there are a lot of other things going for it too. And it may not take much longer for that stuff to begin to kind of manifest itself in price.
Definitely. And Patrick, how about we end with you? And everyone, thank you so much for joining us with us today. Just last thoughts on silver for 2021, what you're expecting.
For 2021, I'm expecting some really good things for silver. As Craig just mentioned, whether it's a Biden presidency or a Green New Deal type of thing. I mean, if you just look at the renewable energy sector, you see it going up already. And silver does have a role in there with solar panels. So you'd have to imagine if renewable energies go up, you can imagine oil possibly going down, which would then reflect to the miners with lower production costs, and then the miners making gains on silver as well. So I think silver has a lot more upside right now than downside, for sure. Absolutely.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this special episode of Mugs and Metals. Did anybody have a favorite drink today?
This rugged brown ale was real good.
I think the Rising Tide Copper Ale was amazing.
I think I've almost finished this entire bottle. Could be a problem. I just want to say thank you to you all. I look at this and I think about it for a moment, and I almost have to pinch myself that I'm friends with you all, and that we all have things in common, like interests in common. But more than anything, I appreciate it very much that you all took some time out of your evening to be here. You all mean an awful lot to me, all in different ways. And David, we go back so far, and Hunter and Kerry and Dunagun and Chris. And we all have such a deep-rooted history. You all mean so much to me. And Patrick, it's wonderful that you could join us from tomorrow somehow.
From Tomorrowland.
And Elijah and Kaiser, you guys mean so much to me as well. I just want to thank you all very, very much from the bottom of my heart. And I look forward to hopefully doing this again and seeing you all and doing something as crazy as shaking your hands and giving you guys all a hug, hopefully sometime not too far down the road. So seriously, thank you all for taking the time and for being a part of this. You all mean an awful lot to me. Thank you very, very much.
We'll see you in Vancouver.
Cheers everyone.
Forward to it. God bless you guys.
You too.
Take care, all.